Imagine walking into a courtroom where every lawyer is seasoned, every word carries the weight of justice, and every eye is on the judge. Now picture an 8-year-old boy, tiny in stature but radiating confidence, standing at the center of it all. The room falls silent. Nobody expects much from a child until he begins to speak. What follows shocks not only the jury but even the judge himself. How did a boy so young master the art of law? And what secret lies behind his extraordinary brilliance? Long before the courtroom gasped at his words, the boy's story began in the quiet corners of a small neighborhood. He wasn't born into wealth, privilege, or influence, quite the opposite. His family lived modestly, sometimes struggling to make ends meet. Yet, what they lacked in resources, they made up for in resilience, love, and a relentless belief that knowledge was power. From an early age, this boy stood out. While other children played carefree in the streets, he had an unusual fascination with books. Not just picture books or comic strips, but heavy, serious texts that seemed far beyond his years. His mother once caught him flipping through an old law dictionary that had been collecting dust on a shelf. Instead of doodling or tearing the pages, he traced each word with his tiny fingers, sounding them out carefully, like he was uncovering a secret code. It didn't take long for teachers to notice. At school, he was the one asking questions no one expected an 8-year-old to even think of. Why does the law say this? Or what happens if someone breaks a promise in court? His curiosity wasn't random. It was razor-sharp, directed, and persistent. He wasn't just reading for fun. He was trying to understand the structure of justice itself. But brilliance, especially when it shines too early, rarely goes unnoticed or unchallenged. Some adults dismissed him, assuming he was simply mimicking words he didn't truly understand. Others even mocked his interest, calling it cute but unrealistic. After all, what place does an 8-year-old have in the world of law, courts, and judges? Still, his family encouraged him quietly. His mother, recognizing the spark in her son, gave him every ounce of support she could. She couldn't afford elite tutors or expensive schools, but she provided something far more important: unwavering belief. And that belief would become the foundation of the extraordinary moment that was soon to come. The turning point came almost by accident. One evening, while his mother was ironing clothes and the television played softly in the background, a courtroom drama appeared on screen. Most children his age would have quickly grown bored with the slow dialogue, but not him. He sat cross-legged on the floor, wide-eyed, absorbing every exchange between the attorneys and the judge. By the time the episode ended, he wasn't just entertained, he was fascinated. From that day on, his curiosity transformed into something deeper. He began sneaking into the library at school, pulling down books far thicker than what was recommended for his grade. Criminal law, constitutional rights, even dusty case studies, he devoured them all. The librarian, initially skeptical, soon realized he wasn't pretending. He read carefully, asked questions about words most adults had never encountered, and even tried to explain legal principles in his own simple but surprisingly accurate way. At home, he would act out mock trials using his toys as jurors and witnesses. Stuffed animals became defendants, and action figures turned into lawyers. His siblings, amused at first, soon found themselves being cross-examined by their little brother, who demanded they tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. What might have been play for most children became training for him, a rehearsal for the real world he was determined to enter. What struck adults the most wasn't just his memory for complex terms, but the way he understood fairness. If someone was treated unfairly at school, he would argue their case with reasoned points. He didn't yell or complain. He laid out evidence. Teachers began to call him the little lawyer, half in jest but also with a sense of awe. Still, the idea of an 8-year-old taking law seriously was hard for most to accept. Some teachers warned him not to dream too big, while others quietly admitted they'd never seen a mind like his. What none of them knew was that this very passion would soon pull him from the pages of textbooks into the center of a real courtroom, where his voice would echo louder than anyone expected. By the time he was 8, his reputation as the little lawyer had spread far beyond his classroom. Neighbors would jokingly ask him to defend them in petty disputes, and he'd reply with startling seriousness, quoting rules of fairness he had memorized from law books. But beneath the humor, people noticed something real. This child wasn't just reciting words, he was reasoning like someone far older. Then came the event that changed everything. A close family friend found themselves entangled in a small but complicated legal matter. Money was tight, and finding proper legal help was nearly impossible. Out of sheer curiosity, the boy sat in on one of the discussions. He listened quietly, his little hands folded on the table, his eyes darting from speaker to speaker. Then, at one point, he raised his voice. "What if you argue it this way?" he suggested, laying out a point that left the adults speechless. His reasoning wasn't just correct, it was sharp, logical, and delivered with confidence. The family friend chuckled at first, but later admitted that the boy's observation had opened a new perspective on their case. When word of this reached others, whispers began. Could the child actually step into a courtroom? The very idea sounded absurd, even laughable. But the friend insisted that the boy should at least be allowed to watch the proceedings, just to see firsthand how law worked in real life. The mother hesitated, unsure if her son was ready for something so intimidating. But the boy, he was thrilled. The morning of the hearing, he dressed neatly, almost ceremonially, in a shirt and tie that seemed far too big for his small frame. As he walked into the courthouse, heads turned. Lawyers and staff smirked, assuming he was simply tagging along with his family. Nobody suspected that in just a short while, this boy would be standing before a judge and jury, commanding their attention in a way none of them would ever forget. The courtroom was packed that morning. The air was thick with tension, the kind that only rises when people's futures are at stake. Lawyers shuffled papers, the judge adjusted his glasses, and the jury sat waiting, already bracing for a routine hearing. No one noticed at first when the doors creaked open and a boy, barely tall enough to see over the benches, walked in alongside his mother and the family friend whose case had brought them there. At first, the sight of him drew polite smiles. Some whispered under their breath, wondering why a child was sitting in on a legal proceeding. Others assumed he'd be bored within minutes. But the boy didn't fidget, didn't look restless. Instead, he scanned the courtroom with wide but steady eyes, absorbing every detail. The heavy wooden furniture, the solemn expressions, the way everyone waited for the judge's word before speaking. It was as if he had stepped into a living version of the books he had studied so fiercely. When the hearing began, the family friend's attorney stumbled slightly over a point. The boy leaned closer to his mother, whispering something quickly. She tried to quiet him, embarrassed, but the lawyer overheard and froze. Slowly, the lawyer repeated the exact point the boy had just suggested. Suddenly, the courtroom stirred. The argument, though simple, was sharp enough to turn heads. The judge raised an eyebrow, curious. "Who said that?" he asked. The lawyer hesitated, then glanced toward the small figure seated behind him. Gasps rippled through the room when it became clear. The words had come from the child. Most expected the judge to laugh it off. Instead, after a long pause, he leaned forward. "Young man, would you care to explain what you mean?" All eyes turned. The boy, sitting straighter than ever, nodded. He wasn't intimidated. For the first time, his voice would be heard in the very place he had dreamed of standing. The courtroom, once buzzing with murmurs, fell silent as the boy rose to his feet. His small hands clutched the edge of the bench for balance, but his voice carried with an unexpected clarity. "Your Honor," he began, "the argument isn't complete without considering the intent behind the agreement." The words were not only confident, they were precise, chosen with the kind of care that even adult attorneys sometimes struggle to maintain. The judge leaned back, intrigued. "Go on," he said, giving the boy permission to continue. That was all the encouragement he needed. Step by step, the child began outlining his reasoning. He referenced not just the facts of the case, but the very principles of fairness and responsibility. When the opposing lawyer tried to object, the boy didn't falter. Instead, he countered politely but firmly, explaining why the objection didn't hold ground. The courtroom erupted in stunned whispers. This wasn't a child fumbling through memorized lines. This was a mind dissecting arguments, anticipating counterpoints, and delivering them with conviction. At one point, he even cited an old legal precedent he had read in a dusty library book. The judge blinked in surprise, asking him how he knew of it. The boy shrugged, almost innocently, saying, "I read it in the case summaries. It seemed important." The jury exchanged glances, some smiling in disbelief, others shaking their heads as if they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. What struck everyone most was not just his knowledge, but the way he spoke of justice. "The law isn't just about rules," he explained in his clear, childlike voice. "It's about making sure people are treated fairly, no matter who they are." Those words hung heavy in the air, cutting deeper than any technical argument. By the time he finished, the courtroom was silent once again. Not out of mockery, but out of awe. Lawyers who had trained for years sat humbled, realizing they had just been schooled by an 8-year-old boy. When the boy finally sat down, the silence in the courtroom lingered like a weight. For a moment, even the judge seemed at a loss for words. Then, slowly, he removed his glasses, set them on the bench, and addressed the child directly. "Young man," he said, his voice steady but warm, "in all my years on this bench, I have never seen anything quite like this. You have a gift, a rare one. And today, you reminded everyone in this room why the law exists. Not for pride, not for power, but for truth and fairness." The jury, visibly moved, exchanged quiet nods. Some of them smiled, clearly touched by the sincerity in the boy's words. Even the opposing attorney, who had at first scoffed at the interruption, leaned back in his chair with a look that was equal parts respect and disbelief. It was as if the entire room had collectively witnessed a spark of something extraordinary. Something pure, unpolished, but undeniably brilliant. Outside the courthouse, the story spread like wildfire. Reporters who had been covering unrelated cases quickly picked up on the astonishing event. Headlines soon read, "8-year-old stuns courtroom with legal brilliance," and "Child prodigy leaves judge speechless." The boy, who only days earlier had been a curious kid leafing through books, had become a symbol of hope and possibility. But for his family, the moment meant something even deeper. His mother, holding back tears, whispered, "I always knew you were special." To her, this wasn't about fame. It was about seeing her son's voice finally recognized in a world that rarely listened to children, let alone a young black boy from humble beginnings. The impact didn't end with that day. Community leaders began inviting him to speak at youth programs, schools, and civic events. He wasn't just seen as a little lawyer anymore. He was a reminder that brilliance can come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes it takes the innocence of a child to remind the world of its higher ideals.